A young widow was splitting wood with axe to survive the winter, until a lone rancher stopped her. Eliza Rowan brought the axe down harder than the log required, and the blade glanced sideways off frozen grain, slicing air close enough to her boot that she felt the rush against her ankle before she felt the danger. But she reset her stance without flinching and lifted it again as if punishment was the point. She wasn't tired. She was trying to exhaust something that wouldn't quiet. The woodpile behind her cabin was stacked unevenly, half split, half abandoned, and the cabin door stood open because she had stopped bothering with small precautions. When the next swing came down, a hand closed around the haft mid-arc and halted it clean. Eliza jerked back instinctively, ready to strike with whatever she had left. But the man holding the axe did not step closer. He only looked at her hands, and then at the shallow groove in the snow where the blade had nearly cut too deep. "You're not splitting wood," he said evenly. "You're trying to break something." She tried to pull the axe free. He didn't fight her, just held steady until she let go first. Caleb Mercer set the blade upright against the stump and took a slow look around the yard, noticing what most men would miss: the empty hitching post, the missing saddle hooks on the cabin wall, the rope marks where a horse had stood recently and no longer did. "You sold it," he said, not asking. Eliza folded her arms to hide the bruise around her wrist and told him she didn't need commentary from a rancher who rode past twice a week and never stopped before. Caleb didn't respond to the insult. He studied the ridge above her cabin instead. A single rider stood far off along the timber line, too still to be passing through, watching without pretending not to. Eliza followed his gaze and felt her jaw tighten. "He's not here for you," Caleb said quietly. She answered just as quietly, "He's not here for you either." Wind shifted along the ridge, carrying loose snow that softened the rider's outline but didn't erase it. Caleb stepped away from the stump and said, "You're packing." She didn't deny it. The inside of the cabin showed signs of departure: crates half filled, blankets rolled tight, one wall hook empty where something important once hung. "You planning to leave before he decides to come closer?" he asked. Eliza turned back to the woodblock and picked up the axe again, but she didn't swing. "I'm planning not to be here when he does." Caleb took the axe from her hands without force this time and leaned it against the stump deliberately. "Running won't make him forget," he said. Eliza met his eyes for the first time fully, and there was no fear in them, only calculation. It only needs to buy time. Up on the ridge, the rider shifted his horse slightly forward, not approaching, just reminding her he could. She did not look at the ridge again after the rider shifted, because looking too long made a watcher feel invited, and she had learned that lesson the hard way months before. But Caleb Mercer didn't turn away so quickly, studying the angle of the horse and the way the man kept his mount just inside tree shadow, where details blurred but presence remained clear. "He circled last night," Caleb said finally. Eliza did not pretend surprise. She had heard hooves beyond the creek after midnight, slow and deliberate, not the rhythm of a traveler passing through but of someone measuring distance. "He won't knock," she replied. Caleb glanced toward the cabin door, still slightly open, and then back at her. "He doesn't have to." The rider began moving along the ridgeline in a shallow arc, keeping elevation while tracing the outer boundary of her land, and the motion felt less like approach and more like containment. Eliza picked up a split log and set it down again, aware that pretending to resume work would look false now. "They're patient," she said. "They don't shout. They don't threaten." Caleb waited. She added, "They just keep riding until you decide you don't belong." He nodded once, absorbing that. "Who are they?" he asked, not pressing but not retreating either. Eliza hesitated, then answered without drama. "Hail Freight." The name sat heavier than she expected. Caleb recognized it. Most ranchers did. Freight routes, bonded shipments, contracts that ran through 3 counties. "Your husband rode for them?" he asked. She nodded. For a time. Caleb's gaze shifted back to the rider. "And now they think you have something." Eliza didn't confirm it directly, but she didn't deny it either. The rider slowed near the far fence line and dismounted briefly, crouching near a post before remounting without looking toward the cabin. Caleb saw the movement. "He left something," he said. Eliza walked toward the fence despite the warning in her chest, and found a small strip of leather tied neatly around the post, burned at the edge with a single word. "Hail." No note, no demand, just a reminder. Caleb stood behind her but didn't touch it. "He wants you to open the conversation," he said. Eliza untied the leather slowly and held it between her fingers, as if weighing whether to keep or burn it. "He wants me to answer a question I don't have," she replied. Caleb studied her profile carefully. "Then the next step won't be writing," he said. Eliza tied the strip of leather to the wood pile instead of discarding it. "No," she answered. "It won't." Up on the ridge, the rider paused once more, then turned his horse downhill, disappearing behind the trees without ever coming to the door. Eliza did not burn the leather strip. She set it on the table inside the cabin where it could not be ignored, and Caleb Mercer noticed that choice immediately because people who planned to run usually erased reminders, not preserved them. He picked it up and turned it over once, seeing the burn mark pressed deep enough to last, and asked, "What do they think he took?" Eliza stood near the stove and answered without looking at him. "Freight bonds. Paper that could buy land twice this size." Caleb did not react dramatically. "Did he?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "If he did, he never showed me." The quiet inside the cabin felt tighter than the rider's silence outside. Caleb walked the perimeter once, checking window frame, latch, floorboard seam. Nothing forced, nothing broken. That unsettled him more than damage would have. "They've been inside before," he said, not as accusation but conclusion. Eliza stiffened slightly but did not deny it. "After he died," she said. "2 men came while I was burying him." Caleb's jaw hardened, and they found nothing. "If they had," she answered, "they wouldn't still be riding." Outside, the wind shifted sharply and carried the faint echo of hooves somewhere beyond the creek, not close enough to count as approach, but near enough to remind. Caleb stepped back to the table and placed the leather strip flat between them. "You don't know where anything is," he said carefully. "I don't," she replied. Then, after a pause, "But he said something before he died." Caleb waited. He said, "Don't let them dig." Silence followed, heavier than the words. Caleb's mind moved through possibilities. Buried cash box, hidden ledger, marked tree. But he did not speak them aloud. Instead he asked, "Have you ever dug?" Eliza hesitated a fraction too long. "Once," she admitted, "near the shed." "And?" "Nothing." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then they'll come closer next time." As if summoned by the prediction, a soft crunch of snow sounded near the back wall. Both of them turned at once. Caleb moved toward the door without reaching for a weapon, choosing visibility over aggression. When he stepped outside, the yard looked empty, but along the edge of the tree line a single set of fresh boot prints cut toward the rear shed, closer than before. Eliza stepped out behind him and saw it clearly now. The distance between rider and cabin had shortened. Caleb crouched and studied the pattern. He's measuring, he said. Eliza folded her arms tightly against the cold. He's waiting for me to panic. Caleb stood and faced her. Are you going to? She looked past him towards the shed, toward the ground she had once dug in frustration and fear. No, she said. But as the wind shifted again, she noticed something new carved into the trunk of a pine near the shed. 3 shallow cuts angled downward like an arrow pointing toward the earth. And this time, the message wasn't subtle. Eliza Rowan did not sleep after seeing the mark on the pine. She waited until the first light touched the yard and walked straight to the shed with a shovel in her hand. Not because she believed something was buried there, but because she refused to let fear decide the next move. Caleb Mercer followed without asking questions, watching the way she chose the exact patch of earth beneath the carved arrows, the same spot she had once disturbed in desperation. She drove the shovel into the frozen soil with controlled force, not panic, and Caleb noticed her jaw tighten each time metal struck stone. If there's something here, he said quietly, we find it before they do. She did not answer. She dug until the hole reached mid-calf depth, then deeper, striking wood at last, a flat sound different from rock. Both froze. Caleb crouched and brushed soil aside, exposing the edge of a small pine crate no larger than a saddlebag. Eliza stared at it as if it might explode. I never hit that, she whispered. Caleb pried it loose carefully and lifted it out, soil falling from its sides in dull clumps. He did not open it immediately. He looked at her first. If this changes things, you need to know before I do. Eliza nodded once. He broke the lid. Inside lay oil-wrapped papers tied with twine, dry despite the burial. Caleb untied one bundle and unfolded it just enough to recognize official freight seals and bond stamps. Real, not rumor. Eliza's breath thinned. He told me not to let them dig, she said again, this time understanding why. Caleb closed the crate quickly. Now they won't wait anymore. As if the ground itself answered him, a distant rifle crack echoed from the ridge above the creek, splintering a fence post beside the cabin. Eliza flinched but did not drop the shovel. Caleb grabbed the crate and pulled her toward the house. Inside, he ordered, calm but sharp. Another shot struck dirt near the shed, not meant to hit them, meant to rush them. Caleb shoved the crate under the floorboard near the stove and stepped back out into the yard deliberately, hands visible. A rider stood at the tree line, not aiming now, only watching. Mason Cole. He tipped his hat slightly, as if amused, then turned his horse and disappeared behind the ridge. No third shot, no pursuit, just confirmation. Caleb came back inside and shut the door slowly. Eliza stood still, shovel still in hand. They know, she said. Caleb nodded. They suspected. Now they're certain. He looked towards the hidden crate beneath the floor. And now this isn't about rumor anymore. Eliza exhaled slowly, realizing something had shifted. She was no longer being hunted for what she might know, but for what they had just found. Caleb met her eyes and said the one thing that mattered. We decide what happens next. And outside, for the first time, the waiting stopped. She did not touch the crate again after Caleb hid it beneath the floorboard, but the knowledge of it altered the air inside the cabin. She moved carefully, as if the boards themselves might betray them, and Caleb Mercer understood that whatever decision they made now would end the waiting game one way or another. He set his hat on the table and spoke plainly. If we keep this, they come harder. Eliza met his gaze without flinching. If we give it back, they still come. Caleb did not argue. She was right. Outside, the day had gone unnaturally quiet. No rider circling, no visible threat, which made the silence feel deliberate rather than safe. By mid-afternoon, hoofbeats approached openly for the first time. Not one rider this time. 2. Mason Cole stopped near the fence, and another man remained behind him, face partially shadowed but posture confident. Victor Hale himself had come close enough to be seen without stepping fully forward. Caleb stepped out first, closing the cabin door behind him, making sure Eliza remained unseen for the moment. Victor spoke without raising his voice. "You found something?" Caleb did not confirm or deny it. "You fired shots at my fence," he replied evenly. Victor smiled faintly. "Warning shots." Caleb held his ground. "You don't warn with a rifle." Victor's eyes shifted towards the cabin door. "You're protecting something that doesn't belong to you." Caleb responded, "You're hunting something that isn't yours either." A pause stretched. Victor dismounted halfway but did not approach further. "Those bonds were stolen freight," he said. "If they surface, your ranch and her name are both tied to theft." Caleb understood the tactic. Legal pressure, not gunfire. Eliza opened the door then, stepping out on her own terms. "My husband hauled freight," she said steadily. "He was never accused in court." Victor's gaze sharpened. "Dead men don't answer questions." Eliza stepped down from the porch. "Then ask me." Victor studied her longer than before, recalculating. Caleb shifted slightly closer to her without touching her, making the alignment clear. Victor finally spoke. 3 days. Return what you dug up to the trading post and this ends quietly." He mounted fully again. "After that, I take it another way." The riders turned and left without another word. Silence followed, heavier than the gunshot from earlier. Caleb exhaled slowly. 3 days, he repeated. Eliza folded her arms, but not from fear. "He wants it public," she said. Caleb nodded. "He wants us to look guilty before we speak." Eliza looked toward the ridge where they had vanished. "Then we don't give it back quietly." Caleb studied her face, seeing something new, resolve sharpened by pressure rather than broken by it. "You have a plan," he said. She answered calmly, "Yes." And for the first time since the crate came out of the ground, she did not look hunted. Eliza did not wait for the 3rd day. She saddled her mare before sunrise and told Caleb Mercer she would not hand over the bonds in secret, because secrecy was exactly what Victor Hale expected. Caleb did not argue. He adjusted the saddle strap himself and rode beside her toward town, carrying the crate in a canvas sack strapped behind his saddle, not hidden, but not displayed either. When they reached the trading post, more people were present than usual, as if rumor had traveled faster than hooves, and Eliza understood that Victor wanted witnesses if she stumbled. Victor stood near the steps already, calm, composed, certain. "You're early," he said. Eliza dismounted without hesitation. "You asked for quiet," she replied. "I prefer daylight." Caleb remained mounted, watching the edges of the crowd instead of Victor. Eliza walked up the steps and placed the crate on the porch railing, not opening it yet. "You claim these were stolen freight," she said clearly enough for the bystanders to hear. Victor crossed his arms. "They were diverted." Eliza opened the crate herself and removed one bundle of bonds, holding it up. "Then explain this." She pointed to the freight seal stamped along the lower margin. "Cleared at Denver Yard, signed and recorded." Murmurs spread quickly. Victor stepped forward, attempting to take the paper, but she did not release it. "Read the back," she continued. Victor hesitated, then flipped the bond reluctantly. The endorsement line bore his own initials, approval for rerouting goods during a winter backlog. A man in the crowd recognized the mark and spoke before Victor could. That's Hale's sign-off. The tension shifted instantly. Victor's expression tightened, no longer amused. Caleb dismounted then and stepped beside Eliza, not shielding her but standing equal. Victor lowered his voice. "You're misreading ledger language." Eliza answered calmly, "No. You marked them surplus and redirected them." She lifted the paper slightly higher so others could see the ink. "My husband transported what you approved." Silence followed, heavy and undeniable. Victor glanced at Mason Cole, who shifted uneasily. The crowd no longer looked at Eliza with suspicion. They looked at Victor with calculation. Caleb spoke once, firm and measured. "You fired at my property." Victor straightened. "You can't prove that." Eliza closed the crate lid deliberately. "We don't need to." She stepped down from the porch, passing him without fear. "We only need truth in daylight." Victor did not stop her. He could not. As she mounted her horse again, Caleb noticed something else. Victor was not finished. He leaned closer to Mason and spoke one quiet sentence Eliza did not hear. And as they rode out of town, Caleb realized exposure had weakened Victor, but it had not removed him. She did not feel relief after the confrontation in town. She felt movement beneath the surface, the kind that comes before someone changes tactics. And Caleb Mercer sensed it too when he found the south fence gate unlatched that evening, even though he distinctly remembered securing it before they left. He said nothing at first, simply walked the fence line with measured steps, scanning ground instead of horizon, and Eliza followed, reading the signs the way she had learned beside her husband: hoof depth, stride length, direction. "One rider," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "Testing," he replied. The cattle were unsettled but not scattered, which meant whoever opened the gate wanted disruption, not theft. They closed it and reset the latch with a reinforced chain. But before heading back to the cabin, Eliza noticed something wrong at the hitching rail beside the shed. Her mare stood calm, yet one strap of the saddle harness had been sliced cleanly through, not torn. She ran her fingers along the cut edge. "If I'd ridden her hard," she said evenly, "this would have snapped." Caleb examined the blade mark. "That wasn't warning," he said. "That was meant to throw you." Eliza straightened slowly. She did not look shaken. She looked angry. Caleb studied her expression and recognized the shift. This was no longer about proving innocence. It was about refusing intimidation. The next morning, before they could inspect further, Mason Cole appeared again at the outer ridge, not approaching but visible enough to be noticed. Caleb mounted without hesitation and rode toward him, stopping halfway between ridge and cabin so that Eliza could still see him from the porch. The conversation was brief and distant, but Mason's posture was different this time, less confident, more cautious. When Caleb returned, he dismounted without expression. "Victor's angry," he said. Eliza crossed her arms. "Good." Caleb shook his head slightly. "Angry men make reckless choices." She stepped off the porch. "Then we stop reacting." Caleb looked at her carefully. "You're not leaving?" She met his eyes fully now. "I ran once. I dug once. I hid once." Her voice steadied, not loud but final. "I'm not leaving. Not this time. Not for him." Caleb did not answer with reassurance. Instead, he walked to the shed, brought out a heavier bridle, and replaced the cut tack himself, tightening each buckle with deliberate force. Then he moved toward the north pasture and adjusted the secondary fence line without comment. Eliza understood the action clearly. He wasn't promising safety. He was preparing for pressure. Late that afternoon, a supply rider passed near the ridge and slowed long enough to observe the cabin, then rode on toward town. Caleb watched until the rider disappeared. "He'll try something public next," he said quietly. And that night, for the first time, Eliza placed the crate of bonds in the open center of the table instead of beneath the floor, no longer hiding what had drawn the line. Eliza did not wait for Victor Hale's next move. She brought the crate of bonds into town again 2 days later, not to surrender them, but to settle them. And Caleb Mercer rode beside her without speaking because this decision had to be hers. The trading post was crowded again, not by accident but because word had spread that Victor planned to challenge her claim publicly this time. And when she stepped onto the porch with the crate in both hands, Victor was already there with a ledger tucked beneath his arm, and 2 men positioned like silent proof. "You embarrassed me," he said calmly. Eliza set the crate down without flinching. "You embarrassed yourself." Victor opened his ledger and addressed the crowd instead of her. "These bonds were diverted under emergency freight authority. That authority expires if not redeemed within 90 days. He closed the book sharply. "They expired yesterday." A murmur rippled through the bystanders. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Eliza opened the crate and removed not just one bond, but the entire bundle. "Expired freight becomes claimable by holder if endorsed," she said clearly. "My husband endorsed them before he died." Victor stepped forward. "Forgery." Eliza unfolded a second document, a transport confirmation stamped by the rail company's Denver office, bearing the same seal Victor had initialed weeks before. "He endorsed them after your approval," she replied, "which makes them legal." Silence settled heavily. Victor hesitated for the first time, recalculating in front of witnesses. Caleb stepped beside her, not shielding but present. "This ends now," he said evenly. Victor's eyes flicked toward the onlookers. He understood what was happening. If he pushed further without proof, the town would turn fully against him. So he changed tone. "Fine," he said coolly. "Redeem them?" He gestured toward the postmaster, who stepped forward uncertainly. The bonds were inspected, verified, and marked valid in front of everyone. Eliza did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply closed the crate and turned to Victor one final time. "You chased a widow for something you signed," she said. Victor gave a thin smile. "You think paper wins?" he replied quietly, so only she and Caleb could hear. "Paper fades." Caleb stepped closer then, just enough to make the warning clear. Victor mounted his horse without another word and rode away, not defeated but diminished. As the crowd dispersed, Caleb looked at Eliza and asked, "What now?" She exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her shoulders for the first time in weeks. "Now I stop living like someone waiting to be chased." Caleb studied her carefully, then nodded once. The bonds were no longer the center of the fight. Something else had taken its place. And this time, it wasn't fear. Eliza did not wait for Victor Hale's next move. She brought the crate of bonds into town again 2 days later, not to surrender them, but to settle them. And Caleb Mercer rode beside her without speaking because this decision had to be hers. The trading post was crowded again, not by accident but because word had spread that Victor planned to challenge her claim publicly this time. And when she stepped onto the porch with the crate in both hands, Victor was already there with a ledger tucked beneath his arm, and 2 men positioned like silent proof. "You embarrassed me," he said calmly. Eliza set the crate down without flinching. "You embarrassed yourself." Victor opened his ledger and addressed the crowd instead of her. "These bonds were diverted under emergency freight authority. That authority expires if not redeemed within 90 days. He closed the book sharply. "They expired yesterday." A murmur rippled through the bystanders. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Eliza opened the crate and removed not just one bond, but the entire bundle. Expired freight becomes claimable by holder if endorsed, she said clearly. My husband endorsed them before he died. Victor stepped forward. Forgery. Eliza unfolded a second document, a transport confirmation stamped by the rail company's Denver office, bearing the same seal Victor had initialed weeks before. He endorsed them after your approval, she replied, which makes them legal. Silence settled heavily. Victor hesitated for the first time, recalculating in front of witnesses. Caleb stepped beside her, not shielding but present. This ends now, he said evenly. Victor's eyes flicked toward the onlookers. He understood what was happening. If he pushed further without proof, the town would turn fully against him. So he changed tone. Fine, he said coolly. Redeem them? He gestured toward the postmaster, who stepped forward uncertainly. The bonds were inspected, verified, and marked valid in front of everyone. Eliza did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply closed the crate and turned to Victor one final time. You chased a widow for something you signed, she said. Victor gave a thin smile. You think paper wins? He replied quietly, so only she and Caleb could hear. Paper fades. Caleb stepped closer then, just enough to make the warning clear. Victor mounted his horse without another word and rode away, not defeated but diminished. As the crowd dispersed, Caleb looked at Eliza and asked, What now? She exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her shoulders for the first time in weeks. Now I stop living like someone waiting to be chased. Caleb studied her carefully, then nodded once. The bonds were no longer the center of the fight. Something else had taken its place. And this time, it wasn't fear. Eliza Rowan did not leave the cabin behind like something broken. She packed it carefully, sold what could be sold, burned what should not remain, and locked the door without looking back, because this was not escape, it was decision. Caleb Mercer rode beside her without speaking much during the short ride east, allowing the silence to hold weight instead of filling it. When his ranch came into view, it was larger than the cabin land, but not grand. Working fences, solid barn, open yard built for purpose rather than pride. He dismounted first, but did not offer a hand unless she needed one. She did not. Over the next days, she learned the rhythm of the place without being instructed. Feed rotation, pasture shift, ledger system. Caleb did not assign tasks. He observed what she chose and adjusted around it. The first morning she stepped into the yard and picked up an axe from the wood rack, testing its balance. Caleb watched from the fence rail. You don't have to split wood here, he said. Eliza raised the axe and struck cleanly into the log. I know, she answered. She split another piece. I just don't want to stop. He understood what she meant. Splitting wood had never been about winter. It had been about holding control when everything else felt uncertain. Now it was habit shaped into strength. Days passed without riders on ridges, without carved arrows, without warning shots. Victor Hale did not return. Rumor had shifted its direction in town, and paper had done what it was meant to do. But this ranch was no longer about rumor. One evening after work, Caleb stood beside her near the woodpile and said, without ceremony, You don't ride back to that cabin anymore. She lowered the axe and faced him. No, he continued, steady as always. Then stay here. She searched his expression for anything hidden. There was none. Not as a guest, he added. Not as help. The words were measured. Stay because this is where you want to stand. Eliza set the axe down carefully instead of answering quickly. She looked at the house, the barn, the land she had already begun shaping with her hands. She stepped closer to him, close enough to feel warmth, but not dependence. I don't need saving, she said quietly. Caleb met her gaze without hesitation. I know. That was the moment something shifted fully. Not protection, not transaction, but recognition. Weeks later, when the first real thaw softened the ground, they stood before a traveling minister who passed through once each season. There was no spectacle, no crowd, only work paused for an hour. Eliza wore no elaborate dress. Caleb wore no new coat. They stood equal. Afterward, she returned to the woodpile out of habit, lifting the axe once more. Caleb stepped behind her, resting his hand lightly over hers before she struck. She didn't pull away. She didn't hesitate. The log split cleanly. And this time, she was not cutting to survive the winter. She was cutting because she chose to remain. Eliza chose to stay when running would have been easier. If you were in her place, would you have left town or stood your ground? If you love frontier stories built on strength, dignity, and earned love, subscribe Native American Tales for more stories.